Catherine Brennan's body went rigid at Sullivan's diner, one moment laughing softly at her husband's joke about polling numbers. The next, her spine arched violently backward, as though an invisible hand had seized her from within, head snapping 23 degrees to the left with a sickening crack of vertebrae straining against unnatural force. Her hands clawed the table like a drowning woman grasping for shore, fingernails splitting against the varnished oak, leaving for bloody crescents in the wood. Eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, empty, lifeless, the Catherine inside trapped somewhere unreachable. Foam appeared at her mouth, pink-tinged with blood from where she'd bitten clean through her tongue. Convulsions racked her frame in rhythmic waves exactly 4.2 seconds apart. Her body transformed into a puppet jerked by merciless strings. The smell, burnt almonds mixed with ozone, the distinct scent of a brain misfiring, filled the air and made nearby diners gag. The water glass didn't just fall. It exploded against the black and white checkered floor. Porcelain plates slid in horrible slow motion, crashed, disintegrated into ceramic shrapnel. Campaign strategists scrambled backward, chairs scraping, expensive suits forgotten, years of political composure evaporating into primal terror. A woman screamed, raw and animal. A young staffer fumbled with his phone, dialing 911, dropping it twice, tears streaming because this was the third time this month, and everyone knew Catherine was dying. Kate. Catherine. Please, God, please. Mayor Thomas Brennan's voice shattered completely, every political facade crumbling, leaving only a terrified husband watching his wife slip away in front of 30 helpless witnesses. 90 seconds. That was all she had left. But here was the devastating truth nobody in that diner knew except Thomas. The secret that had been slowly killing him alongside his wife. Catherine hadn't gone 48 hours without a seizure in 11 months. 333 days of watching her body betray her. 333 nights of sleeping with one hand on her chest, waiting for the next convulsion to steal her away. 27 brain surgeons and neurologists had examined her at University of Wisconsin Hospital, the best medical minds in the Midwest, their diplomas covering entire walls, their reputations supposedly unquestionable, their expertise worth $800 per hour. 3 separate brain surgeries where surgeons opened her skull like a broken music box, probing for structural abnormalities that weren't there, sewing her back up with apologetic smiles and empty promises about trying the next approach. Experimental anti-epileptic drug combinations that turned his vibrant, book-loving wife into a hollow-eyed zombie who couldn't remember whether she'd eaten breakfast or what day it was. A vagus nerve stimulation device surgically implanted in her chest. A $50,000 piece of technology that did absolutely nothing except leave a 4-inch scar and another layer of disappointment. A desperate pilgrimage to Mayo Clinic in Minnesota where the nation's top specialists ran every test twice, consulted among themselves in hushed voices, and still came up empty-handed. Their carefully neutral expressions unable to hide the truth Thomas read in their eyes. We don't know how to save her. For $0.7 million spent, enough to buy a mansion, to fund a Senate campaign, to change 1,000 lives. Wasted on failure after failure after failure. Nothing worked. Nothing. The doctors had given her 3 months before the seizures would cause irreversible brain damage, before Catherine Brennan, mother, wife, former literature professor who could recite entire Yeats poems from memory, would be gone forever, replaced by a breathing shell. And across the dining room, behind the scarred wooden counter, a waitress stood frozen, coffee pot trembling in her hand so violently that hot liquid sloshed over the rim and burned her knuckles, medical knowledge screaming in her brain like an alarm she couldn't silence, terror paralyzing every muscle in her body. The waitress's name was Maya Henderson. Her name tag said so in cheerful red script, just Maya, first name only, the way restaurants labeled their invisible people. But 5 years ago, she had been Dr. Maya Elizabeth Henderson, youngest chief neurosurgery resident at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago, nationally recognized for her groundbreaking research on treatment-resistant epilepsy. The rising star everyone said would revolutionize neurology before she turned 35. Her colleagues had called her the pattern hunter because she possessed an almost supernatural ability to identify neurological triggers in seizure presentations that others dismissed as meaningless statistical noise. She'd published 4 peer-reviewed papers before age 30, each one cited hundreds of times by researchers who'd never met her. She'd had offers from Johns Hopkins, from Mass General, from Stanford, institutions that didn't just invite her, but begged her to join their neurology departments. Until the day Dr. Philip Brennan, Mayor Thomas Brennan's younger brother and chief of neurosurgery at UW Hospital, a man whose ego far exceeded his actual competence, fabricated evidence that she'd killed a patient during surgery. The truth was that Philip had made the fatal surgical error while Maya was assisting, but he'd falsified patient records, manufactured witness statements, and destroyed evidence to protect his reputation and eliminate the only person who knew what he'd done. The hospital board hearing lasted 47 minutes. 47 minutes to annihilate a decade of medical training, to murder a career, to erase a human being from her profession. 12 faces staring at her from behind a mahogany table while she begged them to investigate, to look at the actual surgical footage, to believe her. Mayor Thomas Brennan had sat among them, scrolling through his phone with barely concealed boredom, voting to revoke her medical license permanently because his brother asked him to, and who cared about some young doctor's career anyway. They voted unanimously, destroyed her out of convenience and familial loyalty and institutional arrogance. Now Maya had exactly $512.89 in her checking account. She knew the precise amount because she checked it obsessively. She carried $127,000 in medical school debt for a career she could never practice again. Her younger brother Ethan's cancer treatment cost $400 monthly, and missing even one payment meant he'd lose his spot in a clinical trial keeping him alive. She lived in a studio apartment above a laundromat where the pipes clanged all night like tortured souls. The man screaming on the restaurant floor begging God to save his wife was the same man who had casually destroyed Maya's entire life with a board vote 5 years ago. Before I tell you what happened in the next 90 seconds, before I show you the choice that would change everything, answer me this. Could you step forward to save your enemy's wife, knowing it might send you to prison? Could you risk exposing the medical knowledge you've hidden for 5 years? Even though exposure means your younger brother loses his cancer treatment and might die while you rot in a cell? Could you help the man who destroyed your career, who voted to erase you without even bothering to investigate the truth, who treated your decade of training like it was garbage to be discarded? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments below, because there's no right answer here. This isn't a test of your morality. It's a window into how you navigate impossible situations where every choice costs something you can't afford to lose. And hit that subscribe button right now, because what this waitress sees in Catherine's seizure pattern, what 27 brain surgeons at Wisconsin's top hospital missed for 11 months while spending nearly $5 million, it will leave you absolutely speechless. The answer is so obvious, so clear, that when you hear it, you'll wonder how medical professionals with decades of experience could possibly have overlooked it. But they did, because they were looking in the wrong place, because they dismissed the one clue that mattered, because the medical system is designed to trust credentials and status over actual diagnostic competence. This isn't just a medical mystery about missed diagnoses and seizure patterns. This is a story about displaced genius, about brilliant minds forced into invisible jobs because one powerful person decided to destroy them. It's about institutional blindness, about how systems protect themselves by crushing whistleblowers and silencing truth-tellers. It's about the moment when staying silent becomes more dangerous than speaking up, even when speaking up might cost you everything. The next 30 minutes will show you why Catherine Brennan's seizures stumped 27 specialists. You'll see exactly how Maya's mother, a nurse who died 3 years ago, documented the warning signs 13 years earlier that could have prevented everything. You'll discover the connection between Maya's destroyed career and the man whose wife is dying on a restaurant floor. You'll watch as institutional arrogance collides with hidden expertise, as power meets competence, as the invisible become unavoidably visible. But here's what you need to understand. If you're not subscribed, YouTube's algorithm might not show you the ending. It might cut you off right before the revelation. It might decide you're not engaged enough to see justice delivered. So subscribe now. Make sure you see how this ends. Make sure you're there when the truth explodes and the powerful are forced to reckon with what they've done. 90 seconds. That's all Catherine had left. And Maya had to decide. Maya's hands moved before her mind could catch up, before the rational part of her brain could catalog the consequences and scream at her to stop. The coffee pot clattered onto table 6, dark liquid splashing across laminated menus and a forgotten newspaper. She was across the dining room in 4 strides, her sensible non-slip shoes suddenly moving with the speed and purpose they hadn't shown in 5 years. She dropped to her knees beside Catherine's convulsing body, the sharp pain of kneecaps hitting tile not even registering. "Step back, give me room," Maya commanded, her voice steady with surgical calm, the tone she'd used in 1,000 emergency situations when she was Dr. Henderson and people listened because the white coat demanded it. Campaign staffers froze mid-panic, their expensive suits and political credentials suddenly meaningless. Mayor Brennan stared at her, mouth hanging open in shock. The waitress, the invisible woman who'd refilled their coffee without them ever really seeing her, was giving orders. And somehow everyone was obeying. Maya's fingers moved to Catherine's neck, checking pulse points with practiced precision, carotid first, feeling the rapid flutter of a heart working overtime, then radial at the wrist, then femoral at the groin. Muscle memory from 10,000 examinations guided her hands without conscious thought. Her eyes tracked the head turn, the distinctive 23-degree leftward snap that preceded each convulsion by exactly 1.3 seconds. She noted the hand placement. Catherine's fingers weren't grabbing at the front of her throat where choking victims instinctively reached, but pressing at the sides at the sternocleidomastoid muscles, as though trying to massage away pain originating deeper in the brain. The smell hit Maya's trained senses like a diagnosis written in the air. Burnt almonds mixed with ozone. The distinct olfactory signature that only someone with advanced neurological training would recognize as significant. Not the smell of the diner's kitchen, not environmental. This was an olfactory hallucination, a phantom scent generated by misfiring neurons in the temporal lobe, one of the most specific indicators of where in the brain the problem originated. She saw the pattern the 27 specialists had missed, all of it clicking together in her mind like puzzle pieces that had been scattered across a table for months while everyone looked at the wrong picture. "Sir," Maya said, looking up at Thomas Brennan, her voice cutting through his panic like a scalpel. "When she seizes, does her head always turn left first? Always the same direction?" Thomas stared at her, his face pale as paper, confusion and desperate hope warring in his eyes. "Yes," he whispered, then stronger. "Yes, always left every single time. Then the convulsions start. Who are you?" Maya ignored the question. "Has anyone tested her for autoimmune encephalitis?" The words came out clinical, precise, each syllable carrying the weight of a diagnosis. Anti-NMDA receptor antibodies? Temporal lobe inflammation? Checked for environmental or psychological triggers tied to trauma? Silence. Complete, devastating silence. The paramedics who'd just arrived stopped in the doorway. The campaign staffers looked at each other with blank expressions. Thomas Brennan's face transformed from confusion to something else. The dawning horrible realization that this waitress had just asked a question that no one, not one of the 27 specialists, not the Mayo Clinic neurologists, Not the surgeons who'd opened his wife's skull 3 times. Had thought to ask. No, Thomas finally said, his voice barely audible. No one's mentioned that. They said it was structural epilepsy, medication resistant. They said. They were wrong, Maya said quietly. And in that moment, 5 years of invisibility shattered like glass. 5:17 a.m. Maya's phone alarm buzzed. A harsh, mechanical screech that jerked her from shallow sleep. She slapped it silent and stared at the water-stained ceiling of her studio apartment, at the brown discoloration that had spread another inch since last month, at the flickering overhead bulb that made everything look sick and yellow. The Murphy bed didn't fold properly anymore. The hinge mechanism had broken 3 months ago, and she couldn't afford the $180 repair. Specific financial math scrolled through her mind like a ticker tape she couldn't shut off. $512.89 in checking account. Rent $875 due in exactly 4 days. Brother Ethan's chemo support payment $400 due by Friday. Medical school debt $127,000 with $340 monthly minimum payment she'd missed twice already. Groceries budget $43 for this entire week. The numbers haunted her dreams. Cold shower because hot water cost an extra $23 monthly and she couldn't justify it. She stood under the icy spray, teeth chattering, counting to 60 before shutting it off. Instant coffee. The cheapest brand from the dollar store, tasting like burnt cardboard and regret. Diner uniform pulled from the single chair that served as her closet. Black pants with a permanent grease stain on the left thigh that no amount of washing could remove. White button-down with Sullivan's Diner embroidered in red thread across the pocket. On her cramped particle board desk, hidden beneath a stack of unopened bills. A neurology textbook, Gray's Anatomy of the Nervous System, bookmarked at the temporal lobe epilepsy chapter. Pages worn soft from repeated reading. Tucked inside like a pressed flower. A photograph of her younger self in surgical scrubs, smiling, holding a plaque that read Dr. Maya Henderson, Resident Excellence in Epilepsy Research, Northwestern Memorial Hospital. She touched it once, briefly, then closed the book. That person didn't exist anymore. 3-block walk through Madison's downtown in the pre-dawn darkness. Frost-coated State Street sidewalks like powder glass. Wisconsin winter in late November cutting through a thin jacket. The only one she owned. With teeth made of ice. Her breath came out in white clouds that disappeared into the black air. Maya passed an elderly man at the bus stop hunched on the bench, and her diagnostic training kicked in automatically. She noted his asymmetrical facial droop, left side noticeably lower than right, left arm hanging limp at his side, early-stage Parkinson's indicators in the resting tremor of his right hand. He needed to see a neurologist within the month. She almost stopped to tell him, then remembered she was nobody, just a waitress who'd be late for her shift. Her fingers twitched in phantom surgical gestures when anxiety spiked, suturing motions, the precise movements of tying surgical knots, scalpel grip positioning, muscle memory she couldn't erase no matter how hard she tried. At the crosswalk, 2 businessmen talked behind her and she overheard, "Yeah, doc switched me to lisinopril, 20 milligrams twice daily." Maya's brain calculated automatically. Half-life of 12 hours, peak plasma concentration at 6 hours, potential for first-dose hypotension. Should take it at night to avoid dizziness. She wanted to turn around and warn him. She kept walking. Her brain wouldn't stop being a neurosurgeon just because the state of Illinois had revoked her license. The training was permanent, embedded in her neural pathways like a second language she'd never forget. It was a curse disguised as expertise. Sullivan's Diner smelled like fresh brewed coffee, dark and bitter. The good kind that cost $14 per pound. Mixing with bacon grease sizzling on the flat top and rosemary focaccia baking in the brick oven. The morning regulars were already filing in. Construction workers in paint-splattered jeans, state employees in discount suits, university students hunched over laptops pretending caffeine could substitute for sleep. Manager Marcus Barrett barely looked up when Maya clocked in at 5:58 a.m. Table 6 needs refills, 12 wants extra napkins, and Hartwell's got a reservation at 6:30 tonight, he said, his voice flat with exhaustion from a double shift. Don't screw it up. The name hit Maya like ice water poured down her spine. Hartwell. Mayor Thomas Hartwell. The man who voted to destroy her. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned bone white. Morning shift blurred into its familiar rhythm. Maya memorized 34 orders without writing anything down. Never needed a notepad, photographic memory for medical training where she'd memorized entire surgical procedures, medication protocols, anatomical diagrams. Table 3. 2 scrambled eggs, wheat toast, coffee black, side of fruit. Table 7. Belgian waffle, extra whipped cream, orange juice, turkey sausage. Her brain cataloged them effortlessly. Regular customer Mr. Chin, 68 years old, retired postal worker. Came in every Tuesday and Thursday. Ordered his usual oatmeal and mentioned he'd been tired lately. Maya noticed what he didn't. The yellowing of his skin tone, the subtle jaundice in the whites of his eyes, elevated bilirubin indicators visible in his complexion. Possible liver dysfunction. She leaned in gently. Mr. Chin, have you seen your doctor recently? Sometimes fatigue with that kind of color change can be important. Might want to get some blood work done. He patted her hand dismissively. You worry too much, Maya. 3 weeks later, he would return to the diner specifically to find her, tears in his eyes, gripping her hand. Early-stage liver disease caught in time. Treatable with medication. Doctor said another 3 months and it would have been too late. She'd saved his life and he'd never know she was a doctor. She diagnosed 6 customers during breakfast rush, potential diabetes, early pregnancy, thyroid disorder, medication interaction warning, possible skin cancer, cardiac arrhythmia. None of them knowing the waitress refilling their coffee was quietly saving their lives. During her 15-minute break, Maya pulled the hidden notebook from her locker, a cheap spiral-bound thing she'd bought at the dollar store, tucked behind her extra apron and emergency tampons. Inside, detailed medical observations written in the precise shorthand she developed during residency. Pages of entries about Catherine Brennan, who'd been coming to Sullivan's twice weekly for 2 months. Maya flipped to the entry from 3 weeks ago. Her own handwriting tight and controlled. KB experienced minor absence seizure at 6:47 p.m. 10-second stare, dissociative episode, left hand tremor, recovered without apparent awareness of time loss. Head position during episode, 23-degree leftward tilt, consistent with previous observations. Episode duration, exactly 4.2 seconds from onset to recovery. Olfactory indicator, burnt almond smell noted by customer at adjacent table. Possible temporal lobe involvement. Hallucination originating from misfiring neurons in olfactory processing center. Query: why hasn't anyone tested for autoimmune encephalitis triggers? Temporal lobe lateralization, this consistent, suggests focal inflammation, not generalized epilepsy. Recommendation: anti-NMDA receptor antibody panel, lumbar puncture, detailed trauma history. Maya had been documenting Catherine's seizure patterns for weeks, just in case, even though stepping forward to share this information would mean exposing herself, risking prison, destroying everything she'd painstakingly rebuilt. The notebook was evidence of a legal medical practice. It was also the answer to a dying woman's mystery. She closed it and shoved it back into her locker. Tonight, the Brennans would be here. 6:34 p.m. The black Mercedes SUV parked illegally directly in front of Sullivan's diner, blocking a fire hydrant, because men like Mayor Thomas Brennan didn't worry about parking tickets. The driver, a square-jawed man in a dark suit with a visible earpiece, opened the rear door with practiced efficiency. Mayor Thomas Brennan emerged and immediately commanded the space around him like gravity bending toward a star. Charcoal Tom Ford suit tailored to perfection, Italian leather shoes that cost more than Maya's monthly rent, Wisconsin state flag pin on his lapel, salt and pepper hair styled immaculately. But his eyes, exhausted, hollow, ringed with dark circles, spoke of months without real sleep, of a man slowly drowning while maintaining a perfect smile. Behind him, Catherine Brennan stepped carefully from the vehicle. 52 years old, elegant gray wool dress that hung slightly loose on her frame, Hermes scarf in deep burgundy, pearl earrings catching the streetlight. But she moved with the careful fragility of someone whose body had become a minefield, each step deliberate, one hand gripping Thomas's arm for balance. Campaign strategists followed. 3 men and 1 woman in expensive suits, voices low but urgent, discussing poll numbers and media appearances and donor expectations. Inside the diner, every server stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. Manager Marcus practically sprinted across the floor to greet them, smoothing his tie, pasting on his most obsequious smile. Mayor Brennan, wonderful to see you, tables ready. Best spot in the house, corner booth, just like you requested. Everyone knew what a Hartwell reservation meant. Generous tips that could make a week's wages, political connections that could lead to better jobs, and the absolute necessity of perfection in every detail. Maya stood behind the counter, hands gripping the espresso machine edge until her knuckles turned white, until the metal edge bit into her palms. 5 years ago, Thomas Brennan had sat on the hospital board that stripped her license. He'd voted without investigating, trusted his brother's fabricated evidence, destroyed her with bureaucratic indifference while checking his phone. And now he was here, in her diner, 20 feet away. Before entering Sullivan's, Thomas noticed elderly Mrs. Patterson, 82 years old, lived 3 blocks over, husband died last year, struggling with a heavy glass door, for bags of groceries weighing down her frail arms. He immediately stepped back, held the door wide with one hand. "Let me help you with those, Mrs. Patterson. Where's your car?" Genuine warmth flooded his voice. No performance, no cameras, no staffers watching to document his kindness for campaign ads. He walked her to her ancient Buick parked at the curb, loaded her trunk with surprising gentleness, waved off her effusive thanks. "You take care now. And call my office if you need help with anything. I mean it." For 90 seconds, he wasn't a mayor or power broker, just a decent man helping his neighbor. Maya watched through the window, and the complexity of it made her stomach twist. The villain who destroyed her career also helped elderly women carry groceries. Human beings were infuriatingly complicated. Catherine sat carefully in the corner booth, moving like blown glass that might shatter if jostled, lowering herself inch by inch until she was settled against the worn vinyl. Her iPad clutched against her chest like armor. She used a text-to-speech app to communicate on bad days when Seizures stole her words and left her mute, trapped inside her own skull. Enormous brown eyes held oceans of exhaustion, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from months of fighting a losing battle. Thomas ordered for her with heartbreaking gentleness. Grilled chicken, no seasoning. Spices can trigger seizures sometimes, steamed vegetables, plain rice, water with no ice. And could we have the corner booth with less lighting? Overstimulation makes it worse. His hand covered hers on the table, thumb stroking her knuckles in small circles. "We'll figure this out, Kate," he whispered, voice cracking slightly. "Dr. Phillips bringing in another specialist from Johns Hopkins next week. This one's supposed to be the best in the country." Catherine's smile was sad and small. They'd heard that before. Maya approached the table, order pad shaking slightly in her hand, pen pressed so hard against paper tore through. Catherine looked up, and for a moment their eyes locked. Catherine smiled, small, genuine, the kind of smile that said, "I see you as a human being, not furniture, not an invisible servant." Real recognition, real warmth. Maya's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just her enemy's wife, some abstract concept she could hate from a distance. This was a suffering woman drowning in plain sight, while 27 experts watched helplessly. This was someone's mother, someone's wife, someone who smiled at waitresses like they mattered. Paramedics arrived 6 minutes after Catherine's seizure stabilized, rushing through the door with equipment cases and practiced urgency. Maya had positioned Catherine in the recovery position. On her left side, airway clear, head slightly elevated. Monitored pulse and breathing every 30 seconds. Prevented tongue-biting injury by keeping Catherine's jaw relaxed. Professional, precise, textbook perfect. Lead paramedic, name tag read J. Morrison, mid-40s, thick mustache. Eyes that had seen too many emergencies. Knelt beside Maya and started his assessment. "What did you do?" he asked. Fingers on Catherine's wrist, checking pulse. Airway management, prevented aspiration, monitored convulsion duration and pattern, ensured she didn't injure herself during the episode. Maya responded automatically, the words flowing with clinical precision she couldn't suppress. Morrison's eyes narrowed, locked on her face. "You're a waitress," he said slowly, suspicion creeping into his voice. "That's pretty advanced first aid. Most civilians would have just called us and panicked." Maya's stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. "I took EMT courses years ago, basic emergency response training," she lied, forcing her voice to stay steady despite panic roaring through her skull like a freight train. "Figure it was good to know." Morrison didn't look convinced. His eyes lingered on her face a moment too long, but he focused back on Catherine, checking vitals, preparing for transport. Thomas Brennan approached Maya, his business card trembling in his fingers like a leaf. "Thank you," he said, voice hoarse with emotion. "Whatever you did, whoever you are, you may have saved my wife's life. If there's anything I can do, anything at all." He stopped, really looking at her for the first time, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Have we met before? You seem familiar. Your face." Maya's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "No, sir, I just work here," she said quickly, backing away. "I hope your wife recovers." She turned before he could ask more questions, before recognition could dawn, before her carefully constructed invisibility could shatter completely. In the storage room, cramped space smelling of industrial cleaning supplies, flour dust, and cardboard, Marcus cornered Maya, his face flushed with anger and fear. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, keeping his voice low. "You can't just jump into medical emergencies. Liability insurance, lawsuits. The diner could get sued if something went wrong. What if you'd made it worse? What if she died?" Maya's hands shook, adrenaline crash hitting her like a wall. "She was dying, Marcus," she said quietly. "I couldn't just watch. I couldn't." He softened slightly, seeing the genuine distress in her face. "Look, I get it, you want to help. But if anyone asks questions, insurance people, lawyers, anyone, you took an EMT course years ago and acted on basic training. Nothing more. You followed standard first aid protocols. That's it. Understood." Translation: don't expose whatever medical training you're hiding, or we're both legally liable. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd exposed herself. Thomas Brennan had looked at her with recognition hovering just out of reach. It was only a matter of time now. Maya's mind flashed involuntarily to 5 years ago, the memory vivid as a knife wound. Hospital board conference room at Northwestern Memorial, harsh fluorescent lighting that washed everyone's faces corpse gray. 12 faces staring at her from behind a long mahogany table like a firing squad. Dr. Philip Brennan standing at a presentation screen, his voice confident, authoritative. Dr. Henderson's recklessness during the Cardenas procedure resulted in patient mortality. She poses an unacceptable risk to patient safety. Fabricated patient complaints scrolling on the screen, falsified surgical notes, manufactured malpractice claims. All lies. Thomas Brennan's voice bored, barely looking up from his phone. "I vote to revoke Dr. Henderson's medical license permanently." All in favor? 11 hands rose. Not one person asked for her side. Not one person investigated. Her career ended in 47 seconds. She'd walked out of that room and ceased to exist. Maya couldn't sleep. 2:17 a.m., and her mind kept replaying Catherine's seizure. The 23-degree head turn, the 4.2-second rhythm, the burnt almond smell that meant something the specialists had missed. She sat at her cramped desk, laptop open. The screen's blue light washing her face ghost pale in the darkness. She searched everything about Catherine Brennan's medical crisis. Wisconsin State Journal article from 6 months ago. Mayor's wife's mysterious illness baffles top neurologists. 11 months, no answers. The photograph showed Catherine before the illness, vibrant, laughing at a charity gala, champagne glass raised. Her face radiant and alive, nothing like the fragile woman Maya had seen tonight. Medical details buried deep in the article, past the political speculation and campaign implications. Onset 11 months ago, tried every conventional treatment protocol. For $0.7 million spent across multiple institutions. 3 brain surgeries that found nothing. Mayo Clinic consultation that ended with the specialists admitting they were stumped. Maya cross-referenced the timeline obsessively, opening tab after tab, building a chronology. Catherine's first documented seizure occurred on March 15th, exactly 1 week after the car accident. Wait. Maya dug deeper, searching obituaries, accident reports. Not Catherine's sister, her mother. Rebecca Montgomery, age 78, died instantly when a semi-truck ran a red light on Highway 12. Catherine, the passenger seat, witnessed the whole thing. Catherine stopped driving after that, developed severe panic attacks, crippling anxiety, couldn't get in a car without hyperventilating. Then the seizures began. Pattern recognition fired in Maya's brain, like synapses lighting up a neural map. Trauma-triggered autoimmune response. Psychological stress causing the immune system to attack the brain's temporal lobe. She'd seen it twice during her residency. Patients who developed autoimmune encephalitis after severe emotional trauma. She found radiology reports from UW Hospital leaked by a patient advocacy group fighting for medical transparency. Maya scrolled through Catherine's brain scans, MRI images showing beautifully normal brain structure. No tumors, no lesions, no structural abnormalities that would explain the seizures. But buried in the radiologist's notes, one line. Small artifact present in left temporal lobe region, approximately 3 millimeters. Likely imaging error or processing glitch. Clinically insignificant. Maya zoomed in on the image until pixels blurred. That wasn't an imaging error. That was focal cortical inflammation. Exactly the biomarker for autoimmune encephalitis. The bright spot indicating active immune attack on brain tissue. The specialists had dismissed it because it didn't fit their structural brain damage hypothesis. They've been looking for a broken part to fix surgically, not an immune system gone rogue. They've been treating the wrong condition for 11 months while Catherine's brain slowly destroyed itself. Maya's hands trembled on the keyboard. She knew what was killing Catherine Brennan, and she had no legal way to help. Across town in his home office lined with law books and political biographies, Mayor Thomas Brennan sat hunched over his mahogany desk at 3:04 a.m., running background checks, with resources most civilians didn't have access to. The waitress, Maya something, who'd asked the question no specialist in 11 months had thought to ask. The woman whose hands had moved with surgical precision, whose medical terminology had slipped out too naturally to be EMT training. His chief of staff had provided her employment records within 2 hours. Maya Henderson, hired at Sullivan's Diner 18 months ago. Sealed legal records. Name change filed 5 years ago through Wisconsin Family Court. Previous legal name, Dr. Maya Elizabeth Henderson. Thomas felt his stomach drop. He pulled archived board meeting minutes from his hospital oversight committee term, the position he'd held before running for mayor. September 2020. Medical license revocation hearing. Dr. Maya Henderson, chief neurosurgery resident at Northwestern Memorial, accused of fatal surgical error during a routine procedure. He found the archived video footage stored on the hospital server, clicked play, and watched himself destroy a woman's life. The conference room, the long table, 12 board members including himself, Philip at the front, presenting his case with polished confidence. And Thomas, God, watching himself was nauseating, scrolling through emails on his phone, barely paying attention, annoyed that the hearing was cutting into his lunch break. His own voice from 5 years ago. The evidence is clear. Dr. Henderson poses an unacceptable risk to patients. I vote to revoke her license permanently. On screen, Maya's younger face, 34 years old, devastated, tears streaming, standing to plead. The patient died because Dr. Philip Brennan made the incision error during the surgery, not me. I was assisting. He's falsifying records to protect his reputation and his career. Please, just look at the surgical footage. Review the actual evidence. No one listened. Thomas remembered now, with sick clarity. He'd been annoyed the hearing was scheduled during his lunch hour. Had somewhere to be, trusted Philip's recommendation without investigating because Philip was family, and why would his brother lie? 11 hands rose in unanimous vote. They destroyed her career out of convenience and familial loyalty and bureaucratic indifference. And 5 years later, working as a waitress in a diner he frequented, she'd saved Catherine's life anyway. She'd stepped forward knowing it could expose her, knowing it risked everything, and save his wife. Thomas put his head in his hands and felt shame burn through him like acid. At 3:47 a.m., Thomas called UW Hospital Medical Records Department, used his mayoral authority to override privacy protocols, demanded access to archived emergency files. The car accident that killed Rebecca Montgomery, Catherine's mother, 13 years ago. Emergency room documentation from St. Mary's Medical Center, Milwaukee. Attending nurse, Sarah Henderson, RN. Thomas read Sarah's nursing notes with growing horror. Patient Catherine Brennan, age 39, presenting with acute anxiety and shock. Witness to mother's fatal accident. Vital stable, but patient reports occasional temporal headaches and strange smells described as burnt almonds. Possible traumatic stress response or early neurological involvement. Strongly recommend temporal lobe EEG and comprehensive autoimmune panel within 6 months. Patient at high risk for post-traumatic autoimmune development, given trauma severity and specific symptom presentation. The follow-up never happened. Insurance company classified it as non-urgent, denied coverage. 13 years later, Catherine's brain had slowly developed the autoimmune inflammation that 27 specialists missed, and Sarah Henderson, Maya's mother, had documented the warning signs that could have prevented everything. She tried to save Catherine 13 years ago and been ignored by the same system that would later destroy her daughter. 4 p.m. the next day, Thomas Brennan walked into Sullivan's diner alone. No security detail, no campaign staffers, no driver waiting outside. Just a man in a gray wool coat, his face hollowed by a sleepless night. Dark circles under his eyes like bruises. Every server stopped moving when they recognized him. Conversations died mid-sentence. Marcus looked up from a register, confusion flashing across his face because the mayor never came alone. Maya's blood turned to ice. She stood behind the counter, coffee pot frozen in her hand, watching him cross the floor toward her with deliberate steps. He stopped 3 feet away. "Maya Henderson," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "I need to speak with you, privately." It wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in courtesy. Maya set down the coffee pot before her shaking hands could betray her. She followed him to the storage room, Marcus's confused stare burning into her back. The storage room, shelves of industrial-sized canned goods, cleaning supplies and plastic jugs, 50-pound bags of flour stacked against the wall, the smell of cardboard and bleach and flour dust. Thomas closed the door, shutting out the diner's noise. "You're Dr. Maya Henderson," he said, not looking at her, staring at a shelf of tomato sauce like it held answers. "Chief neurosurgery resident at Northwestern Memorial Hospital until 5 years ago when I voted to destroy your career." Silence stretched between them like a chasm. Maya's hands balled into fists, nails biting into her palms. "Yes," Maya said, and her voice was controlled fury, ice over volcanic rage. "That's me. You voted to revoke my medical license based on fabricated evidence from your brother Philip. You didn't investigate the claims. You didn't look at the surgical footage. You didn't care. You destroyed my career, my reputation, my entire life because a board hearing interrupted your lunch schedule and your brother asked you to." Thomas flinched like she'd slapped him. "You're right," he said quietly. "I failed you through arrogance and laziness and blind family loyalty. Philip presented evidence, and I trusted him without question because he's my brother, and I assumed he wouldn't lie. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know sorry doesn't." "No, it's not enough," Maya snapped, cutting him off. Years of suppressed rage finally finding voice. "I lost my medical license, my career, my reputation, my future. I have $127,000 in debt from a career I can't practice. My brother Ethan has lymphoma and I can barely afford his treatment on waitress wages. I work double shifts and live in a studio apartment with pipes that clang all night, and I diagnose customers who'll never know I'm a doctor. Sorry doesn't rebuild 5 years. Sorry doesn't give me back what you took." "Then let me offer something more than sorry," Thomas said, pulling out his phone with trembling hands, opening Catherine's medical files. "My wife is dying. 27 specialists have failed for 11 months. They've opened her skull 3 times and found nothing. But last night you asked about autoimmune encephalitis, a condition none of them thought to test for. Please, just look at her records. Tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if you see what they're missing." Maya wanted to walk away. Every instinct screamed to let the man who destroyed her suffer, to let him feel helplessness and loss. But Catherine's face flashed in her mind. The woman who'd smiled at her like she mattered, who was dying while experts stood around looking important. "If I help," Maya said slowly, each word deliberate, "and anyone finds out I practiced medicine without a license, I go to prison for up to 5 years. My brother loses his treatment support and might die. Everything I've rebuilt over 3 years collapses. Why should I risk that?" "I'll protect you," Thomas promised, meeting her eyes. "You couldn't even protect me when I had a license," Maya fired back. "Why would I trust you now?" "Because my wife doesn't deserve to die for my mistakes," Thomas said quietly. And the raw vulnerability in his voice, the complete stripping away of political persona, broke something in Maya's armor. Silence hung between them for 10 long seconds. 24 hours, Maya said finally, her voice flat. "I'll review the medical files and put together a diagnostic protocol. But if your specialists dismiss my recommendations again because I'm just a waitress, if they refuse to listen because my insight comes from beneath their status, I'm done. I walk away, and Catherine is on her own. And Mr. Brennan," she looked at him directly, holding his gaze, "this doesn't make us even. This doesn't undo what you did to me. This doesn't erase 5 years. I'm doing this for Catherine, not for you." Because she smiled at me like I was human, Thomas handed her an encrypted tablet. Hospital access codes already entered. Maya's fingers moved across the screen, scrolling through MRI images, EEG readings, blood work panels, surgical notes. Her eyes caught the radiologist's dismissed note buried on page 7. Small artifact present, likely imaging error, clinically insignificant. She zoomed in on the MRI image, her breath catching. "They're looking at this completely wrong," she whispered, more to herself than to Thomas. "That's not an artifact. That's focal temporal lobe inflammation. Anti-NMDA receptor autoimmune encephalitis triggered by psychological trauma. Treatable with high-dose immunotherapy if caught in time. But they've wasted 11 months. For 48 hours, Maya worked in secret, living two lives simultaneously. Day shifts at Sullivan's Diner, refilling coffee, memorizing orders, smiling at customers who never really saw her. Nights at her apartment, hunched over her laptop until 4 a.m., compiling detailed medical protocols with the precision she'd learned during residency. Research papers on anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis downloaded from medical journals. Treatment plans typed out in clinical language. Immediate antibody panel testing. High dose for immunoglobulin therapy. Corticosteroid protocols. Plasmapheresis if first-line treatment failed. Seizure medication adjustments to prevent the convulsions, while the immunotherapy addressed the root cause. She built a comprehensive diagnostic and treatment roadmap that any competent neurologist should be able to follow. She sent encrypted recommendations to Thomas at 2:37 a.m. on the second night. Immediate NMDA receptor antibody testing. Comprehensive autoimmune panel. Lumbar puncture to check for elevated white blood cells in cerebrospinal fluid. High-dose immunotherapy to be started within 72 hours. Every day of delay increases risk of permanent brain damage. This is treatable if you act now. Thomas forwarded her protocols to Catherine's medical team at UW Hospital within the hour. Maya waited, checking her phone obsessively, hoping for acknowledgement that someone was finally listening. The response came back via terse email from Dr. Richardson, Chief of Neurology, copied to 5 other specialists. With all due respect, these suggestions appear to come from someone without current medical expertise or familiarity with Mrs. Brennan's case. Autoimmune encephalitis was considered and ruled out in month 3 of treatment. Pursuing experimental immunotherapy based on a waitress's opinion would be medically irresponsible and potentially harmful. We recommend continuing current evidence-based treatment protocol. Maya read the dismissal 3 times, rage burning in her throat like swallowed acid. They wouldn't listen because her insight came from beneath their status. Because admitting a waitress was right meant admitting they'd been wrong for 11 months. Catherine's seizures worsened dramatically. 3 seizures in one 24-hour period, each lasting longer than the last, each stealing more of her cognitive function. Emergency room admission at 11 p.m. Catherine unconscious. Thomas holding her hand in the ambulance, praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in. The inflammation was progressing faster now, visible on the new MRI scans, as the focal lesion grew from 3 millimeters to 7 millimeters in 2 weeks. The neurologist stood around Catherine's ICU bed looking grave and helpless, adjusting medication dosages that weren't working, ordering tests they'd already run twice. Dr. Philip Brennan, chief of neurosurgery, Thomas's younger brother, the man who destroyed Maya 5 years ago, took over Catherine's care personally. He reviewed her chart with meticulous attention, flipping through consultation notes, medication orders, test results. His eyes stopped on the recommendations Thomas had forwarded. The diagnostic style specific, precise, focused on pattern recognition and temporal lobe localization. He'd seen it before. The writing style was unmistakable. Clinical shorthand, specific terminology. The way complex neurological concepts were explained. He'd read hundreds of Maya Henderson's patient notes during her residency. This was her work. Philip's face went cold. He pulled out his phone and made 2 calls. First, to Wisconsin Medical Board, filing a formal complaint requesting immediate investigation into unlicensed medical practice. Second, to his personal attorney, the same one who'd helped fabricate evidence 5 years ago, instructing him to draft an emergency cease and desist letter and prepare criminal charges. Maya Henderson had survived his first attempt to destroy her. He wouldn't make that mistake twice. The legal envelope arrived at Maya's apartment at 3:15 p.m., delivered by certified mail requiring signature. Wisconsin Medical Board letterhead, official state seal, the weight of institutional authority. Maya's hands shook as she tore it open. Notice of investigation. practicing medicine without license. The Wisconsin Medical Board has received credible evidence that Maya Elizabeth Henderson has engaged in unauthorized medical practice in violation of Wisconsin Statute 448.30. Criminal charges pending review by the District Attorney's Office. Violators face up to 5 years imprisonment and fines up to $10,000. Signed, Dr. Philip Brennan, Board Consultant. Maya sank onto her bed, the letter trembling in her hands. Philip had recognized her diagnostic style in Catherine's chart notes. The enforcer who destroyed her career 5 years ago had found her again, and this time he was bringing criminal prosecution. 5 years in prison. Her brother Ethan would lose access to his clinical trial, the experimental treatment that was keeping his lymphoma in remission. Without her $400 monthly contribution, he'd be moved to standard chemotherapy with a 40% lower survival rate. Her mother, Sarah, would be transferred to County Memorial, the underfunded facility where patients died in hallways waiting for care. Everything she'd rebuilt, every double shift, every swallowed insult, every moment of carefully maintained invisibility, collapsing because she tried to save a woman's life. Her phone rang at 4:47 p.m., unknown number. Maya answered with dread already pooling in her stomach. Ms. Henderson, this is Jennifer Walsh from Whispering Pines Hospice. The woman's voice was professionally sympathetic, the tone of someone delivering bad news repeatedly. I'm calling about your mother, Sarah Henderson. We hate to call about financial matters during such a difficult time, but your account is now 60 days past due $8, $400 outstanding. We've tried to work with you, but unless full payment is received by this Friday at 5 p.m., we'll be required by our facility policy to transfer your mother to County Memorial. Maya closed her eyes. County Memorial, the underfunded public facility where patients waited 8 hours in the ER, where hospice patients were placed in hallways because there weren't enough rooms, where her mother, who'd spent 37 years as an ER nurse saving other people's lives, would die without dignity. Understand, Maya whispered, her voice breaking. I'll have it by Friday. A lie. She had $512.89 in her account and no way to get $8,400 in 3 days. She hung up and stared at the cease and desist letter. Everything was falling apart. Maya sat on her apartment floor at 11:43 p.m., surrounded by evidence of her collapsing world. Catherine's medical files spread across the worn carpet. MRI images, blood work panels, treatment protocols she'd spent 48 hours creating. The cease and desist letter propped against the wall. Official state seal, mocking her. Hospice bill showing $8,400 in red numbers she couldn't pay. Her brother Ethan's chemotherapy schedule pinned to the wall above her desk. The clinical trial that was keeping him alive. 3 years of rebuilding. Working double shifts until her feet bled. Budgeting every dollar down to cent. Staying invisible, swallowing her expertise. Accepting invisibility as the price of survival. All of it collapsing in 72 hours because she dared to help someone. She cried for 7 minutes. Not quiet tears, but ugly, violent sobs that tore through her body like convulsions, like Catherine's seizures, like her own life breaking apart. Tears for the career stripped away by lies and family loyalty. For her mother dying slowly in a hospice facility she could no longer afford. For Ethan fighting cancer while his sister faced prison. For Catherine, whose seizure she could stop if the law didn't criminalize her knowledge. For every invisible person society trains us to overlook, every displaced genius working jobs beneath their expertise, every truth-teller crushed by institutions protecting their own. Her whole body shook. Snot ran down her face. Her hands cramped from clenching. The apartment walls seemed to close in, the water-stained ceiling pressing down, the flickering light bulb casting shadows that looked like accusations. When the crying finally stopped, Maya felt hollowed out, emptied, a shell of a person sitting in the wreckage of her life. On her desk, half buried under unpaid bills. Her mother's old hospital ID badge from St. Mary's Medical Center, Milwaukee. Sarah Henderson, RN, employee number 4472, 37 years of service. The photo showed her mother at 45, smiling, vibrant, wearing scrubs and a stethoscope, back when her hands still worked before MS stole her motor control. Maya picked it up with shaking hands. On the back, in her mother's handwriting, blue ink faded but still legible. Words written when Maya graduated medical school. You have healing hands, Maya Bear. Don't you ever forget that. The world will try to make you small. Don't let them. Maya stared at those words until they blurred. Her mother had tried to help Catherine 13 years ago and been ignored. History repeating itself. She pulled out her phone and called St. Mary's Medical Center Records Department. I need emergency reports from 13 years ago, she said, her voice hoarse from crying. Car accident. Patient name Rebecca Montgomery, fatality. Attending nurse Sarah Henderson. The archived report came through email 20 minutes later. Maya opened the PDF with trembling hands. Sarah Henderson's emergency nursing notes, dated 13 years ago, timestamp 2:47 a.m. Patient Catherine Brennan, age 39. Witness to Mother Rebecca Montgomery's fatal MVA. Presenting with acute stress reaction, hyperventilation, dissociation. Vitals stabilized. Patient reports occasional strange smells described specifically as burnt almonds, recurring temporal headaches localized to left side, brief episodes of time disorientation, concern for possible early neurological involvement secondary to psychological trauma. Strongly recommend temporal lobe EEG and comprehensive autoimmune panel within 6 months. Patient at high risk for post-traumatic autoimmune development, given trauma severity and specific symptom presentation. Urgent follow-up required. The follow-up was never done. Maya found the insurance company's denial letter attached. Recommended testing classified as non-urgent, not covered under current policy. Patient may pursue at own expense. Catherine's family hadn't pursued it. The symptoms had seemed minor at the time. 13 years of untreated autoimmune inflammation had slowly developed in Catherine's temporal lobe, exactly where Sarah Henderson had predicted. 27 specialists had missed what a nurse documented in an emergency room 13 years ago. Maya's mother had tried to save Catherine and been ignored by the same insurance, bureaucracy, and medical hierarchy that would later help destroy her daughter. Everything connected. Everything came back to systems that ignored people who weren't important enough. Maya stood, wiping her face with her sleeve, feeling something harden inside her chest. She looked at her mother's ID badge, at the cease and desist letter, at Catherine's files. My mother saved Catherine once, Maya said aloud to the empty apartment, her voice steady now. She tried to prevent this 13 years ago, and nobody listened. I will finish what she started. I'll go to the hospital. I'll treat Catherine myself, even if it means prison, even if Philip destroys me again, because staying silent makes me complicit in her death, and I won't let my mother's work be for nothing. She grabbed her jacket. Friday could bring whatever it would bring. Maya had just made the choice that will define everything. She's walking into UW Hospital in the next 24 hours, where she could be arrested the moment she enters. Dr. Philip Brennan, the man who destroyed her career, who's now threatening criminal charges, is waiting. The medical establishment that dismissed her recommendations will have to face her directly. But here's what I haven't told you yet. There are 3 revelations coming in the next 20 minutes that will completely reframe this entire story. Before we continue, I want your prediction. How does Maya win this? Through medical evidence that proves she's right and the 27 specialists were wrong? Through exposing Philip's lies from 5 years ago? Or through something we haven't seen coming yet? Drop your answer below and subscribe right now if you haven't yet, because YouTube's algorithm only shows endings to engage subscribers. You've invested over 35 minutes in Maya's story. Don't let the algorithm decide you don't get to see your victory. You need to see what happens when the invisible become unavoidably visible, when truth collides with institutional power, when a waitress walks into a hospital and forces an entire medical system to reckon with what they missed. Maya walked through UW Hospital's main entrance at 6:15 a.m. wearing thrift store business attire. A black blazer she'd found at Goodwill for $8, gray slacks that didn't quite fit, flats that pinched her toes, carrying Thomas's authorization letter folded in her pocket like a talisman. The automatic doors slid open with a mechanical whisper. Antiseptic smell hit her immediately. The distinctive hospital scent of disinfectant and suffering that she hadn't breathed in 5 years. Security stopped her at the desk. A broad-shouldered man with a name tag reading, R. Martinez. ID and purpose of visit, he said, not looking up from his computer screen. Dr. Maya Henderson, consulting neurologist for Catherine Brennan's case, she said, voice steady despite her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The light tasted like copper on her tongue. She wasn't a doctor anymore. The state of Illinois had taken that from her 5 years ago. But for Catherine, she'd pretend. For Catherine's mother, Sarah, who'd tried to save this woman 13 years ago, she'd walk into the fire. Martinez checked his computer, frowned, picked up his phone. She's not on the approved list. She's with me. Thomas Brennan's voice cut through, appearing from the elevator bank, looking haggard and unshaven. His suit rumpled like he'd slept in it. Dr. Henderson is my wife's consultant. Let her through. Thomas met Maya at the ICU entrance, his face hollowed by sleepless nights and fear. Dark circles under his eyes made him look 10 years older than he had 3 days ago. Philip knows you're here, he warned, voice low and urgent. He's threatening to have security remove you, to file criminal charges immediately. I'm using mayoral authority to override him temporarily, but you have maybe an hour before the hospital administration forces me to back down. Hospital counsel is already questioning my authority to grant you access. Then let's not waste time, Maya said, pushing through the ICU doors. Catherine lay in bed 7, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed. EEG leads attached to her scalp with adhesive pads, wires snaking to monitors, displaying brainwave patterns. For lines running immunosuppressants that weren't working, anti-epileptic medications at doses that should have stopped the seizures, but didn't. She looked smaller than she had at the diner, fragile, her skin pale against the white sheets. Maya approached, took Catherine's hand gently. Mrs. Brennan, I'm Maya, she said softly. I'm going to help you. Catherine's eyes opened, exhausted, desperate, but with a flicker of hope that made Maya's chest tighten. The waitress, Catherine whispered, her voice hoarse. You knew something was wrong. Maya performed a full neurological examination with hands that remembered every motion. Cranial nerve assessment. Checked eye movements, facial symmetry, tongue deviation. Motor function testing, grip strength, arm drift, leg flexion. Sensory response evaluation. Light touch, temperature sensitivity. Her hands moved with the precision of 10,000 prior examinations. Muscle memory from a career that still lived in her body even if it didn't exist on paper. She reviewed Catherine's chart. Current medications making her drowsy but not stopping seizures. Failed treatments spanning 11 months. Dismissed test results that held the answer everyone had ignored. Dr. Philip Brennan stormed into the ICU room like a hurricane. Late 50s, silver hair immaculately styled. Charcoal suit that cost more than Maya's monthly rent. Radiating fury that made the air crackle. Security, he shouted, pointing at Maya with a trembling finger. Remove this woman immediately. She's practicing medicine without a license. She's a criminal. Thomas stepped between them, physically blocking Philip's advance. Philip, stop, he said, voice cold with an authority Maya had never heard from him. She's a fraud, Thomas, Philip hissed, face flushing red. I had her license revoked 5 years ago for malpractice that killed patient. She's dangerous. She shouldn't be anywhere near Catherine." Thomas's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You fabricated evidence to destroy her career because she witnessed your surgical error during the Cardenas procedure. I watched the archived hearing footage 2 nights ago. I saw what I was too arrogant and lazy to investigate 5 years ago. You falsified patient complaints, manufactured malpractice claims, and framed Maya for your own mistake." The room froze. Medical staff stopped moving. Nurses at the central station looked up. Residents in the hallway turned to stare. The ventilators and monitors beeped in the sudden silence. Thomas continued, his voice rising with righteous anger. "This is Dr. Maya Henderson, one of the best neurosurgeons on the East Coast, nationally recognized for epilepsy research, until I destroyed her career with a careless vote based on my brother's lies. She's been working as a waitress at Sullivan's Diner for 5 years. 5 years. While my wife's doctors, including you, Philip, have failed for 11 months. She asked about autoimmune encephalitis in 90 seconds. A diagnosis none of you considered. She's staying. And if you try to remove her, I'll make sure every media outlet in Wisconsin knows that you fabricated evidence and nearly killed my wife with your incompetence." Maya pulled up archived medical records on the ICU computer, fingers flying across the keyboard with the practiced speed of someone who'd spent years navigating electronic medical records. "Mrs. Brennan," she said gently, turning the monitor so Catherine could see. 13 years ago, you were in a car accident on Highway 12 that killed your mother, Rebecca Montgomery." Catherine nodded, tears forming instantly, the old grief still raw after all these years. "I was in the passenger seat," she whispered. "I watched her die. The ER nurse who treated you that night at St. Mary's Medical Center documented specific neurological warning signs in your chart," Maya continued, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to crack it. "Temporal headaches localized to your left side. Unusual olfactory hallucinations. You described smelling burnt almonds. She recommended immediate autoimmune panel testing and temporal lobe EEG within 6 months. That nurse was Sarah Henderson, my mother." Catherine's breath caught, her hand flying to her mouth. "Sarah," she breathed. "I remember her. She held my hand for 2 hours. She was so kind. The insurance company denied the follow-up testing, classified it as non-urgent," Maya said, pulling up the denial letter on screen. "For 13 years, untreated autoimmune inflammation has been slowly developing in your temporal lobe. Every specialist looked for structural brain damage, tumors, lesions, genetic abnormalities, and missed the inflammatory markers that were hiding in plain sight. My mother tried to prevent this 13 years ago. She saw the warning signs that could have stopped this before it started. She documented everything. I'm here to finish what she started. I'm here because she would never forgive me if I let her patient die when I could save her." Tears streamed down Catherine's face. Thomas gripped the bed rail, so hard his knuckles turned white. Maya displayed Catherine's MRI images on the large monitor mounted on the ICU wall, pointing to the small bright spot the radiologist had dismissed. "This artifact your radiologist noted as likely an imaging error," she said, her voice taking on the clinical precision of a teacher explaining a concept. "It's focal cortical inflammation in your left temporal lobe. Anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis triggered by severe psychological trauma, specifically witnessing your mother's death. Your immune system, responding to overwhelming stress, began attacking the NMDA receptors in your brain's temporal region." She pulled up Catherine's seizure documentation. The 23-degree leftward head turn before every seizure? That's your temporal lobe inflammation localizing. The seizure activity originating from this exact spot. The burnt almond smell? That's a classic olfactory hallucination caused by misfiring neurons in your olfactory processing center, right here in the temporal lobe. The pattern has been consistent for 11 months because the inflammation has been growing in the same location. She turned to face the assembled medical team. Dr. Sarachin, ICU, attending neurologist. 3 residents with wide eyes. 2 nurses taking notes. Philip standing frozen in the doorway. You've been treating structural epilepsy when you should have been treating autoimmune disease. High-dose immunotherapy. For immunoglobulin, corticosteroids, plasmapheresis to filter the antibodies attacking her brain. NMDA, receptor antibody testing to confirm the diagnosis. Adjustment of seizure medications to work synergistically with the immune treatment. Start today and Catherine's seizures will stop within 72 hours as the inflammation decreases. Wait any longer, and the brain damage becomes irreversible. She'll lose cognitive function permanently. Silence crashed through the room. Then Dr. Sarachin stepped forward, nodding slowly. She's right, Chin said, her voice quiet but firm. We dismissed the autoimmune hypothesis in month 3 because the initial antibody panel came back negative, but we only tested for the most common antibodies. We never ran the comprehensive NMDA receptor panel. Let's order it immediately, along with lumbar puncture to check cerebrospinal fluid. Philip Brennan's face drained of color, turning ashen gray. His misdiagnosis, his 11-month failure, his missed pattern, all exposed in front of his entire department. His career ending in real time. Catherine's antibody panel returned 36 hours after the blood draw. Positive for anti-NMDA receptor antibodies. Titers elevated at 1:320, confirming Maya's diagnosis. High-dose immunotherapy began immediately. For immunoglobulin infused over 6 hours, methylprednisolone corticosteroids to suppress the immune attack, plasmapheresis scheduled to physically remove the antibodies from Catherine's bloodstream. Within 48 hours, the seizure frequency dropped by 80%. Only 2 minor episodes compared to the 6 to 8 she'd been experiencing daily. By 72 hours, Catherine went 60 consecutive hours without a single seizure, the longest period in 11 months of hell. The EEG monitoring showed dramatic improvement, the abnormal electrical activity in her temporal lobe decreasing visibly. Maya stood at Catherine's bedside on the 3rd day, watching her patient. No, her friend, sitting upright in bed, alert, speaking clearly without the drowsiness and confusion that had plagued her for nearly a year. Thank you, Catherine said, squeezing Maya's hand with surprising strength. Her eyes were clear, focused, present in a way they hadn't been in months. You saved my life when 27 doctors couldn't. You risked everything for me. Your mother Sarah saved you first, Maya said quietly. I just finished what she started. Thomas stood in the corner, tears running openly down his face, not bothering to hide them. Thomas used his mayoral influence to trigger an emergency hospital board review 5 days after Catherine's treatment began. The conference room on the hospital's administrative floor filled to capacity. Board members, hospital administrators, medical staff from neurology and neurosurgery departments, Wisconsin Medical Board representatives in attendance, hospital legal counsel recording everything. Thomas stood at the head of the long mahogany table and presented evidence with prosecutorial precision. Archived hearing footage from 5 years ago showing Philip's fabricated patient complaints. Surgical records from the Cardenas procedure proving that Philip, not Maya, had made the fatal incision error. Documentation of the 11-month misdiagnosis of Catherine's condition, with emails showing that multiple staff members had suggested autoimmune testing, but Philip had overruled them. Sarah Henderson's 13-year-old nursing notes that had predicted everything. Dr. Philip Brennan sat at the table, face ashen. Expensive suit suddenly looking too large on his diminished frame, his attorney, a nervous man named Douglas Webb, sitting beside him, shuffling papers with shaking hands. The board chair, Dr. Margaret Foster, a steel-haired woman in her 60s with a reputation for intolerance of misconduct, leaned forward. Dr. Brennan, she said, her voice cutting. "Did you falsify evidence to destroy Dr. Henderson's medical career 5 years ago?" Philip's silence was answer enough. His attorney whispered urgently in his ear. Philip stared at the table. Thomas continued, "I'm establishing an independent investigation into Dr. Brennan's conduct spanning the past decade. Additionally, I'm personally funding Dr. Henderson's complete medical license reinstatement process, and I'm providing full restitution. My wife's mother, Sarah Henderson's hospice care at Whispering Pines, will be paid in full for the next 2 years. Dr. Henderson's brother Ethan's cancer treatment will be fully funded through remission and beyond. Her medical school debt of $127,000 will be cleared. And I'm establishing a $500,000 scholarship fund for displaced medical professionals who've been wrongly removed from practice." The room erupted in murmurs. Medical staff who had dismissed the waitress's opinion 3 days ago now sat silent, faces flushed with humiliation. Dr. Foster called for a vote. The board voted unanimously. Dr. Philip Brennan removed immediately as chief of neurosurgery, medical license, suspended pending full investigation. Immediate comprehensive review of all cases he'd supervised in the past 5 years. 2 security officers entered the room, escorted Philip from the building, his attorney following helplessly behind. Maya watched from the back of the room, feeling nothing close to triumph, just exhaustion and the hollow satisfaction of survival. When the formal proceedings concluded, Maya stood and addressed the board, her voice steady and clear. "I don't want revenge," she said, looking at each board member in turn. "Revenge doesn't help the 8 other doctors Philip destroyed. Revenge doesn't prevent the next Maya Henderson. I want institutional change." She outlined specific reforms. Medical boards must have independent investigative protocols when evidence against a physician comes from a single source. Hospitals must establish protected channels for whistleblowers to report colleague misconduct without fear of retaliation. Diagnostic competence must be evaluated on pattern recognition and patient outcomes, not credentials and status alone. Some of the best diagnosticians in this country are working invisible jobs because one powerful person decided to destroy their career, Maya said. "The system that allowed Philip to destroy me has destroyed others. Fix the system." Standing ovation from assembled staff. Dr. Sarah Chun approached Maya after, offering interim medical privileges during her reinstatement process. The invisible waitress, visible expert at last. Justice delivered. Philip Brennan removed from power, his license suspended, his lies exposed. Maya's medical license being reinstated after 5 years of erasure. Catherine recovering, seizure-free, alive. But here's what I didn't tell you at the beginning of this story. This is case number 47 in my Hidden Genius series. For the past 2 years, I've been documenting hundreds of brilliant people working invisible jobs because one institution, one powerful person, one moment of injustice destroyed them. PhDs with published research washing dishes in restaurant kitchens. Former CEOs who built companies driving Uber at night. Concert pianists who performed at Carnegie Hall cleaning houses for $15 an hour. Lawyers, engineers, teachers, scientists, displaced, erased, forced into invisibility. If you've made it this far in Maya's story, you're part of the 8% of viewers who watch until the end. That matters. It means these stories of invisible genius resonate with you. Subscribe right now if you haven't. Leave a like on this video. Comment below and answer this. What hidden skill, knowledge, or expertise do you have that would shock people who only see your job title? What are you capable of that the world doesn't see? I read every single comment. Your story might be the next. 3 weeks after the board hearing, Maya walked through UW Hospital's main entrance wearing navy blue scrubs, her ID badge displayed prominently. Dr. Maya Henderson, consulting urologist, interim privileges. License reinstatement process officially underway with Wisconsin Medical Board. Expected completion in 6 months. She'd been assigned an office on the 4th floor, small but with a window, and was treating Catherine's ongoing recovery while seeing autoimmune neurology patients 3 days per week. Her mother, Sarah, had been transferred to Whispering Pines Premium Hospice Facility, moved from the standard wing to a private suite with garden views, full palliative care, nursing staff who knew her name, dignity restored after months of fear. Ethan's cancer treatment fully funded for the next 3 years. Recent scans showing his lymphoma in complete remission. Medical school debt of $127,000 cleared completely. The balance paid in full by Thomas Brennan's personal account. Maya had $47,000 in savings for the first time in 5 years, enough to breathe, enough to stop calculating grocery budgets down to the penny. But it wasn't perfect. She still flinched when men in expensive suits entered conference rooms, her body remembering institutional betrayal. But now she didn't look away. Now she held her gaze, shoulders back, knowing her competence wasn't defined by their opinions or their votes. Catherine had been seizure-free for 21 consecutive days, the longest stretch since before her mother's death. Speech therapy 3 times weekly, helping her process the trauma she'd buried for 13 years, the grief she'd never properly faced. Physical therapy, rebuilding the muscle strength she'd lost during months of seizures and heavy sedation. She was reading again novels, not just headlines, without losing words mid-sentence. She and Thomas attended Maya's first support group meeting for displaced medical professionals, 12 former doctors working service jobs, sharing stories of institutional betrayal and survival, beginning the slow process of rebuilding careers. A surgeon working construction, a pediatrician managing a call center, an anesthesiologist driving a delivery truck. Catherine addressed the group, her voice strong. Dr. Henderson saw me when I was invisible to 27 specialists. She risked everything, her freedom, her brother's treatment, her mother's care, to save my life. I want to make sure no other talented doctor ends up serving coffee because one person destroyed their career. Philip Brennan's investigation expanded beyond Maya's case. Hospital administration discovered he'd systematically destroyed at least 8 other doctors' careers over 15 years using fabricated evidence and falsified patient complaints. District attorney filed criminal charges: fraud, evidence tampering, medical malpractice. Their stories were next. Maya Henderson's journey from invisible waitress to validated medical expert took 11 months from the night Catherine collapsed at Sullivan's Diner. Her victory cost her sleep, safety, and nearly her freedom. She lived in fear of prison while trying to save a life. But she won because she refused to stay silent, when silence meant complicity in someone's death. Here's what I want you to understand. There are 47 more documented stories like Maya's in my ongoing investigation. Displaced geniuses working in plain sight, brilliant minds, exceptional talents, extraordinary competence hidden behind minimum wage jobs because institutions destroyed them. Society trains us to judge competence by appearance, by job titles, by credentials displayed on walls. I'm building a community that refuses that lie. If you made it this far, if you watched all 45 minutes of Maya's story, you're part of the 8% of viewers who watch until the end. That means these stories of invisible genius matter to you as much as they matter to me. Here's how you help this movement grow. Subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a like on this video so YouTube's algorithm shares it with others. Comment below with what struck you most about Maya's story. And answer this question: what hidden skill, expertise, or knowledge do you have that would shock people who only see your job title? What genius are you hiding? I read every comment. Your story might be number 48. Let's make invisible genius visible together. 6 months after Catherine's treatment began, Maya's medical license was fully reinstated. She opened a pro bono neurology clinic for underserved communities in Madison, treating patients who couldn't afford specialists. Catherine volunteered there weekly as patient advocate, her own recovery complete. Thomas stepped down from all hospital board positions, dedicating himself to medical justice reform legislation. Philip Brennan awaited trial on 12 criminal counts: fraud, evidence tampering, conspiracy. 8 doctors whose careers he destroyed were being investigated for license reinstatement.